Friends, I've been listening to you for the last 2.5 days. We come from a slightly different world, as you can see. That's our home in the village where we live. It's a long way from the Sheldonian, very long way indeed. The journey that Shankar, Nikhil and I and many others in rural India have taken has been an arduous one, but one with faith and confidence. Just as people with physical handicaps are looked at as different, the poor are persistently looked at as untouchables, as different. They're not allowed to participate. They can't enter places. They can't express their opinion. And even in countries which call themselves a democracy, they have no say. In fact, in India, we say there are two Indias. One India, which enjoys citizenship, laws, access to everything, and the other is Bharat. We're still part of a feudal system where you don't have any access to anything. And that's why Shankar, Nikhil and I felt compelled to go and stay in this village home, which is actually Shankar's cousin's home. We went and started living there in 1987 to try and see how we could realize this sovereignty for poor people. Because the Constitution of India tells us that we are the sovereigns. But when we go to a government office or when we go anywhere, we're really treated very badly indeed. So where is that sovereignty? It is in that journey trying to talk about social justice, about equality, fighting poverty, fighting corruption, which every day gives everyone a raw deal, everyone goes hungry to bed, that we stumbled on an extraordinary idea. Usually we expect policies to be framed in Parliament only by people who are literate, who've been to Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Yale, or like me, at least speak English. But the right to information has been framed by extremely ordinary people on this earthen platform you see there, where we sat and discussed many a day on how we could, with Gandhian methods, with non-violence, grab our rights. How could we make the government perform? How could we make them deliver? The Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan does not take institutional funds, either from Indians or from foreigners. We exist on a very, very small budget. We all earn about $60 a month as honoraria. We have an institution which is democratic, which is equal. We don't have a director, we don't have a chairperson, we don't have a leader. We all sit together and we decide what should be done for the country. And in this process of decision making, where there's no hierarchy, Gandhi's fundamental method of listening to the people has been a very strong influence on all of us. When we listen to people, when you listen to their ideas, when you listen to their priorities, their humor, their issues, something comes which is more powerful than ourselves. And we believe that the collective is always much more powerful than individuals. And it is in this collective that we've been able to get many of our things going. People do not want doles in India. They want to live with dignity. I know you must be hearing all over the place that the poor are beggars, but they are not beggars. They are people with enormous dignity. They are people like me. I know so many women in the village who are much better than I am and who have got greater compassion than I, because they will share their last bit of bread, which I may not. So these are the people we call poor, horrible figures, targets, beneficiaries, even clients, but not equals. They are, like me, citizens. In this constant concern to wage a war to right to live and to bridge the micro and the macro, to see that the village and what it thought went to Parliament, went to the legislature, that we use democratic institutions, that we gave birth to two rights. One was the right to information, which has affected the whole of India and has actually made governance ethical and possible. The second is the right to work, which is another very important decision. I will tell you two short stories and I'll finish, and then we'll see a small film. I must tell you about Sushila. Sushila has passed just her 4th class. She is a very young colleague of mine. I remember in 1996, when from this village, we went to New Delhi, which is the capital of India, to ask for the right to information law. The press surrounded her and asked her, what she had to do with information. After all, she was a semi-literate woman. What did she know about right to information? Why was she keen on a right to information law? And I'll tell you what she said to them. She said to them, and she wasn't prepared for this question, but she said to them, when I send my son with 10 rupees to the marketplace, when he comes back, I ask for accounts. The government spends billions of rupees in my name, she said. Shouldn't I ask for my accounts? So she said, it's our money, therefore it's our accounts. And this slogan has gone around the whole of India in all the Indian languages. We have 17 Indian languages. In every language, and she defined the law, she defined the need for the law. She was a democrat, she was a constitutional authority, she was a citizen of India when she framed that. And people like that in India, normally we say, well, they're poor people, what do they know? You must tell them what they should do. But in the MKSS, we felt that we should listen to them. And I feel humbled when I'm with Sushila and with many others about the importance of it. There was another important person who defined the right to information in those days, and that was a gentleman called Prabhash Joshi, who was the editor of a very important Hindi daily, a Hindi newspaper. We have lots of Indian language newspapers. So he came to one of our big sit-ins in 1996, and he was amazed at the kind of response this issue had from across civil society. In India, the poor are poor and there's civil society. People who will be allowed to enter into something like the Sheldonian in India would be civil society. The poor would never be let in. They would be asked, what business did they have inside? So I talk about civil society and the people as two separate categories for us. But Prabhash Joshi belonged to civil society. He saw what was happening, and he went back and wrote an editorial in the Hindi newspaper, which also went right across India, which he defined the entire campaign as the right to know, the right to live. Because in India, if you don't know what's happening, you can't get your schooling, you can't get your medicines, you can't get your rations, you can't get anything. So while there are rights, to realize those rights, you need the right to know. Now we'll see a short film. Nikhil will introduce the film. We'll see the film and I'll come back at the end.
Before the film, I'm going to speak briefly about some of the issues that actually got these two pieces of legislation to the place that they did. What you see on the screen just now is one of the very early days. We went like a traditional people's movement group in Rajasthan, starting very small with when you don't get whatever you are demanding and asking for and entitled to under the law. You sit on sit-ins, you do agitations, you do rallies, and finally, the final weapon that people had was to do a hunger strike. But what do you do when you don't have a sympathetic government and doesn't care whether you sit hungry for days and days? It was then that people themselves began this whole process of saying, we have to get out the information that's in the records, and we have to place it in the public domain. And place it in the public domain. That was the first public hearing that people did in a village. It's a village-based public hearing under actually a parachute. And people started using the mode of public hearings where records were placed in the public domain, records at that time that were almost stolen because we didn't have the right to those records. And then as soon as they were placed there, it became dramatically obvious that those records of people who were supposed to have worked had dead people's names. Buildings that did not exist were existing on paper. Roads that did not exist existed on paper, and they were revealed in meetings such as that, and that changed the whole dynamics of everything. We moved then, and immediately the whole system and structure from the lower bureaucracy right upwards clamped down to say no information and no such public audits the way that they are taking place. So we realized that we couldn't be caught in our own area of a few districts or a particular state, and we started traveling around in caravans. We realized that we would have to demand legislation, so we had our first sit-in of 40 days where hundreds of poor people who did not have money, if they didn't earn that day, that family couldn't eat. But they spent 40 days and 40 nights in those sit-ins. They contributed wheat, they contributed food, they contributed money to demand the people's right to information. which is what shocked people right across the country, because they had said this is something that it's an academic issue, a freedom of expression issue. The affluent people would want this, or newspaper people would want this. But what are poor, illiterate people asking for this? And that was 96. The same set of people. Then there was an agitation the next year of 53 days at the state capitol. And carrying on with that, the movement spread right through the country, so that first in 2000 we had a state law, then 11 states had state laws on the right to information, and then there was a national law in 2003, which was a terrible law, and finally there was a fantastic national law in 2005. What you see here is the building of this entire law, and what needed to go into the law actually took place in meetings like this. Legislation was not made in Parliament. The right to information law was actually made on the streets. It was made in discussions, endless discussions with people, and there were certain concepts that were very powerful in this. A concept of accounts which were placed in the public domain, to accountability. Who is it who is actually, because those records revealed who had filled the false name in the muster roll. So people who had been respectable so far became common thieves because the accountability came out in those records. Similarly, as Aruna said, the first slogan was "Our money, our accounts." But the next slogan, and people speak in slogans, and that's why you have banners which are there, which show various slogans which are part of the campaign. People speak in slogans, and the next slogan was, "Ye paisa hamare aap ka, nahi kisi ke baap ka." This money is yours and mine, nobody's private property. And that carried on to, this government is yours and mine, nobody's private property, and this world is yours and mine, nobody's private property. So the concept of democracy, that every individual had an equal say in a democratic structure, was the beginning of that battle for citizenship. Similarly, from fighting corruption to actually fighting the arbitrary exercise of power. It's not just a question of money, but it's how government is run. And from the demand of a birthright, which was how we asked for right to information, to the realization that you need a legal framework to be able to have it, to be able to access it fully. This is the whole process when we went to this, because ordinary people in their own area began to get power. But for ordinary people to get power right across the country, you need legislation. So you had numerous such situations and agitations where you had to go, get things into party manifestos. There was a particular time when the 2005 legislation came that the law first went into a party manifesto through our lobbying for it. Then it went into the ruling party that won, the Congress party, then created a common minimum program where it was put in that manifesto. And then by then, such a high profile had been achieved by the people's movements that someone like Aruna and others like her were put into the National Advisory Council of the last government, which actually framed the legislation to put it into Parliament. This legislation and the right to work legislation. So you move into poor people moving into the dialogue with laws, with Parliament, with parliamentary committees, and you have simultaneously a dialogue with people across the country through caravans, through people moving in the backs of trucks, through public debates, through public pressure, through alliances. We have actually two transformatory laws in the country. The right to information changed the relationship between the ruled and the rulers forever. Because the right to information law says that if I do not get my information, the person not providing the information will be penalized from their own salary. So a person who was kicked out of a government office acquired the power to ask a question and demand an answer. The entitlements under the right to information law in India are that you can get all information except a very small exemption list. You have independent appeal mechanisms independent of the body giving you the information. You have penalties for non-compliance and information not being given in time, which neither the US nor the UK FOI Act have. And you have a situation where you can access information from the lowest office to the highest office. The National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is as transformatory and important, in one line is that any Indian rural citizen can ask for work and must be provided work at minimum wages within 15 days of asking for it. And if they are not provided work, they will be given an unemployment allowance. Now, you can think in a country like India with our populations, I'll just give you two sets of figures. Last year, the budget of that demand-driven employment guarantee law was $10 billion in India. In our state, where we mobilized people to demand that work and people have got it and managed to access it, in the state of Rajasthan last year, $2 billion was spent on the Employment Guarantee Act. The 7 million households went to work. More than half the households of the state went to work, and the economic downturn was not felt in our state and in many rural markets because there was this kind of law and the ability to access these kinds of resources. So finally, what we have ahead are the challenges and potentials that people have to protect. Today, both these laws are being undermined. The right to information law, just last week and the last months, the Supreme Court of India is found itself on the other side, saying we don't want to reveal our assets, we don't want to declare our assets, and people are accessing information of the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister's office and its exchange with the leader of the ruling party, those letters have come out where the Prime Minister is showing that I don't want to actually have right to information the way it is. And every high body actually is finding itself having to be accountable. So a small battle has gone up to the level that it has and gone up as far as it has. What the NREGA has done, Employment Guarantee Act has done, is across the country it's given hope to people to fight. It hasn't made them rich. It's only given them access to 100 days work in a year. But it's given them hope to be able to fight for something worthwhile, to fight for work, not beg for it, demand it as an entitlement, and the two come together. I'd now show you Shankar, because he didn't come here and he would have taken all of you by storm. We are actually a collective, so it's not just Shankar. You'll see a whole bunch of people in this song, of ordinary people and their power of communication and their power of thought in this film that you'll see, and then Aruna will finish. This is the threat and the amendments and stopping the amendments in Delhi, and this is the film.
दारू की बोतल मैं नहीं मांगा, दारू की थैली मैं नहीं मांगा। अब थाको दिमाग खराब हो गया। धरती पे चीजें सगली बता दी थे कि मैं नहीं मांगा।
सब चोरा के रेशम की चीजें बताई।
मजदूर हो, हाँ चीजें वो खाई नहीं चाहे। एक काम कर सको, एक कोई बेरोजगार को जी में पानी नहीं होवे, और 20,000 धमाधम। भाई साहब, इसके अलावा कोई चीज नहीं है यार। अच्छा काम कहीं करो, फेमिन में, और मस्टरों में नाम लिखे, और पूरी मजदूरी देवे, नहीं देवे। अरे मैं समझ गया थाने कहीं चाहे बताऊं, थाने चाहे मस्टोड़ा की नकला मैं मांगा, मस्टोड़ा की नकला मैं मांगा, की फोटो कॉपी मैं मांगा, एक बिल बाउचर मैं मांगा, की फोटो कॉपी मैं मांगा, पंचायत को खर्चो मैं मांगा, और लेखो जोखो मैं मांगा, अरे माँ का रुपया मैं मांगा, पंचायत का रुपया मैं मांगा, विकास का रुपया मैं मांगा, देश का रुपया मैं मांगा, खर्चा को हिसाब मैं मांगा, सूचना को अधिकार मैं मांगा।
Shankar, my friend, my companion, my guru, the person who keeps me on the road happy, lively, committed, and optimistic. Unfortunately, he's not here with us. He lost his granddaughter of 8 years old who had cancer of the brain. She had recovered, and we hadn't thought that she would pass away. But the night before we left, she died. So he hasn't come. But Shankar's extraordinary. But there are many Shankars. And what are they doing? They're bringing and explaining ethics in very simple terms. Ethical discourses, whether in religion or in academic institutions or even within political paradigms, means nothing unless it translates into food, into shelter, to schooling, into livelihoods, into basic things for people. What moved us to live in that house also was that unless you feel that on your skin, unless you have to fetch your water every day that we have to do, unless you have to light the fuel wood stove every day that we have to do. You can't do it. So Shankar, in this other thing that you see on the screen, we did a chariot of scams. He's a marvelous man. He thinks of politics. He's a political person. So though he is culturally endowed, the BJP, leader of the BJP, L.K. Advani, took a chariot through India talking about a Hindu god. What did it make any difference to us? We didn't want as poor people to worship this god and kill somebody who believed in another god. What we wanted was food. What we wanted was to be saved from corruption. So when we went to him, he made fun of us. So Shankar came back furious. And he said, I'm going to set up my own chariot. And he set up that chariot with friends, and it's called the Chariot of Scams. It is one of the most popular things in northern India where Hindi is understood. You take this chariot anywhere, and people get together and you can communicate. And he behaves like a corrupt politician, and people sometimes believe that he is. So they really scream at him, and they yell at him, and he answers. And it's extraordinary. So this is the kind of thing, when you want to fight a people's campaign, a democratic campaign, at least in India, you have to have a democratic mode, a people's mode. You can't communicate just through television. You can't communicate just through radio. You have to speak in their idiom. And that's what we've learned to do. In this, Shankar is showing a puppet, and there are many other things that we do. This is a lawyer, an architect who sings songs. And she's composed songs for right to information and right to employment. They've gone around the whole of India. They're powerful songs. And as we saw in the first session of this 3-day meeting, music brings home to you something that words don't. Music breaks barriers. Familiar tunes take you into another political ideology. They take you into another paradigm so easily. If you use just words, you're stuck. And I think that's what this campaign has really used extensively. We've also learned to use every single kind of skill that we have in India. Lawyers, legislators, political parties, poor peasants and workers' unions, women, we've all got together to understand that to get a better India, we have to struggle for participation in democracy. We can't stay outside. We have to vote, but we have to make that vote work. So India is the largest democracy in the world. We go to the polls every 5 years, but that isn't enough. That vote we cast must deliver. How do you make that vote speak? And that's what right to information is about, because you can ask questions, and they have to give you answers today. They have to give you answers to the extent to which now in India, every single day in the newspapers, you'll find about 40, 50 cases reported of right to information denied, right to information accepted, right to information given, and the consequences, some of which Nikhil told you about. What is the right to information given India and democracy? An extremely simple tool that every citizen can ask anyone in power legitimate questions and must be answered. And I think even in the well-developed democracies, it isn't a reality today. So for instance, we've been able to stop controversial things like genetically modified vegetables because of accessing information. In forcing accountability on an extremely corrupt system. If you make people accountable, then there is a chance that one day you'll have a cleansing of politics, which is important. We need political parties because we want a democracy, and there will be elections, but how do you cleanse them? What has the Rural Employment Guarantee Act done? It's guaranteed extremely poor people who are all skin and bone, who can't think of the next day, but who need employment that day, a guaranteed 100 days of work. For us, it's nothing, but manual work guaranteed for those 100 days has made a tremendous change in their lives. It stopped them from starving to death. It hasn't given them a wonderful future, but it starved them, prevented starvation deaths. It's given and forced them to demand responsibility from an irresponsible state. And that is not because the state is irresponsible, because our system is irresponsible, individuals are irresponsible, and that is the anatomy of a movement. It has also given them the dignity to survive. I remember asking a poor woman, what has this Employment Guarantee Act given you? India has many kinds of people. We have a caste system. There are some people who beg to survive. And she said to us, for the first time in the history of our community, we haven't had to beg for a living. We live with dignity now because we work for it. And for me, it was an extremely emotional day, just as when I listened to Caroline. It's extremely emotional. The same way she moved me to tears because it facilitated a right and a dignity to an individual who's always looked down upon. But there is another side. India's growth rate, you all hear of. India is growing so fast. You see Indians coming out by the thousands, computer literate, doing this, that, and the other. But there is another India. And in the other India is the fallout of this 8.5%. You have sub-Saharan African figures for social development in India. Our figures are awful. If you look at any indicator, we are worse than sub-Saharan Africa. People who are being brutally displaced from all kinds of places, from forests, from land. We are being told that it's for a larger development scenario, for a larger development paradigm. On the pretext of insurgency, whether it's the Maoists today or whether it's a terrorist that was yesterday or tomorrow, we are being forced to give up democratic citizens' rights. So we hope that right to information will somehow be a transformatory right and enable us to grab back some of these very vital, fundamental democratic rights that we all have under the Constitution. In fact, some of my rich friends argue, who've got converted because of listening to so much facts. Before that, it was just, oh, Aruna, you know, she's an activist. She's always talking negative. But when they heard facts, they said, you know, it's true. If I, as a rich person, can own a huge piece of land in Mumbai, then why can't that poor tribal claim equal right to the small tract of land which he or she wants to protect? We need a genuine democracy, and that's what in India I think these two acts will facilitate. I'm not saying that they're going to bring in heaven tomorrow. I have Indian friends in front of me who will say that it cannot be done in India. Of course it can't be done. But it gives us legitimacy to fight for it in a non-violent way. What has been most important is that at a time when we felt that there could be no basic change in all these essential social rights and inequality without violence, these two campaigns have given us a ray of hope that it is possible to fight like Gandhi did, with non-violence, with logic and with reason, to bring about change. And it's also brought in a level of compassion, because after all, we found friends on the other side. Whether it's a civil servant or a politician, we found friends on the other side, because no one is a category. Like I'm not a category, and you're all not categories. We're all human beings. And so in every category, you find kindness, compassion, reason, rationality, goodness, and ethics. And so it's brought together a new group of people who would agree with Gandhi that there is enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So I'll invite Nikhil. We're going to try and attempt to sing in 1.5 minutes a song that Shankar would have sung to end this. Well, I don't know how successful we will be. I also invite my sister, who has sung with me many times, who also worked with Barefoot College many years ago, and my niece, okay, to sing with me because we need a chorus. Will you explain the song?
Yeah, this song basically says corruption has reached its limits. It's time you speak out. So the refrain, and it's a chorus which if you don't help us, we are actually substituting for Shankar, so you have to substitute for the poor. So, the refrain is bolo. Bolo means speak out. So that's all we want you to do, bolo.
And these two lines are, there's been so much thieving, not thieving in individual homes. National theft of loot, dacoity of our rights, of our properties, of so many things. Somebody must speak out. The second line says, there's been so much oppression that somebody must speak out. And this is one of the most popular songs of our campaign, and also disliked by people in power. चोरी बाड़ो घणो हो गयो रे कोई तो मुंडे बोलो शोषण घणो हो गयो रे कोई तो मुंडे बोलो कोई तो मुंडे बोलो रे कोई तो मुंडे बोलो.
Now I'll say, to fight injustice, you have to say bolo. So Aruna will start and then
I'll say Skoll wale and you say bolo, which means everyone in Skoll must speak out. Skoll wale.
To fight injustice,
Bolo.
to fight corruption,
Bolo.
to save our earth,
Bolo.
to be more humane.
Bolo.
Let's hear the men. Only men. Let's hear the men. And women now?
Bolo.
Much louder.
Bas.